One day this year, on a windswept field in historic Lincolnshire, an extraordinary golden object revealed itself from beneath the earth. It was a precious sword hilt, which experts determined to be approximately 1,400 years old. Once, it was part of a magnificent blade, forged by skilled artisans of antiquity. But who wielded this weapon, holding so many untold stories? Was it a mighty Saxon king, whose power stretched across these lands, or a fierce Viking warrior, bringing fear and conquest? And what monsters, real or mythical, did this blade confront before it was lost? Treasures, it turns out, truly are all around us, and every day, new archaeological finds seem to bring pages of our ancient history to life, giving it new breath. To delve into the mystery of this astonishing discovery, researchers traveled directly to Lincolnshire. The person who found the object chose to remain anonymous, so a meeting was arranged with a local archaeologist, who was among the first to see the artifact. This archaeologist, with over 30 years of experience in metal detecting, described his initial impressions with undisguised excitement. According to him, the gold pieces were retrieved from a protective box one by one, and each new appearance of shining gold was truly incredible, comparable to a rabbit magically leaping from a magician's hat. It was a sight, he confessed, that he would remember for the rest of his life. Since the discovered artifact was made of gold and could potentially be declared treasure, it was immediately reported to the coroner, in accordance with strict regulations. Following the established norms of the portable antiquity scheme, the object was also transferred to the British Museum for thorough examination and a detailed report. The reaction of the museum staff, upon seeing the hilt for the first time, was no less enthusiastic and astonished than that of everyone else who had encountered this impressive piece of ancient art before them. At the magnificent British Museum in London, where the find is now carefully preserved, specialists met with curator Angela Kerr Evans and keeper of the Department of Prehistory in Europe, Leslie Webster, to gain deeper insights into the hilt's dating and attempt to identify its probable owner. The object made an indelible impression on them. Experts unanimously described it as a high-class and unusually exquisite work of art, attesting to the incredible skill of ancient craftsmen. Their preliminary assumption was that the hilt dates to the early 7th century, which only underscores the complexity and sophistication of its workmanship, executed with astonishing detail. The specialists demonstrated how different parts of the hilt, like elements of a complex three-dimensional puzzle, fit together perfectly. First, the pommel is attached, then the lower guard, followed by the intricately intertwined section, and after that, the iron grip. It is presumed that the very bottom part had another similar, now lost, detail. The closest analogy to the found hilt was discovered at the fantastic Sutton Hoo site in Suffolk in the late 1930s. It was there, beneath one of the ancient burial mounds, that archaeologists unearthed the richest Anglo-Saxon burial ever found in Britain, presumably belonging to a king or a distinguished warrior. The Sutton Hoo sword is also carefully preserved in the British Museum. Comparing it with the Lincolnshire hilt, experts noted a striking similarity in the arrangement of the guards, pommel, and hilt itself, indicating shared traditions of weapon craftsmanship. However, there were also differences. While the Sutton Hoo hilt features magnificent decorative strips, the Lincolnshire hilt has small clamps and deep rings instead, giving it a unique character. For illustration, an exact replica of the Sutton Hoo blade was demonstrated. It is known that master blacksmiths of that time created truly unique blades with characteristic swirling patterns, highly valued by their owners not only for their beauty but also for their deadly effectiveness. Almost certainly, such a blade was attached to the found hilt, making it part of a very sharp and dangerous weapon. Since the discovered hilt is comparable in quality and craftsmanship to the legendary Sutton Hoo sword, an exciting hypothesis arose about the possible discovery of an equally lavish and significant burial rite here in Lincolnshire. In search of answers and to discuss their own theories, the researchers returned north to meet with the archaeologist again. The artifact's discovery site was on relatively flat ground, just a few steps from a river. Several compelling theories were put forward as to why such a valuable sword ended up precisely here. The simplest suggested accidental loss. Perhaps it simply slipped from its scabbard during travel or hunting. Another version indicated that it could have been a votive offering, as in antiquity, swords were often thrown into rivers or bodies of water as part of complex rituals, paying tribute to gods or spirits. However, the most preferred and intriguing option remained a burial, as this location had a special, almost sacred significance. Several parish boundaries converged here, and as is known, Anglo-Saxon burials were very often located precisely at such boundaries, symbolizing transition and the border between worlds. Thus, the researchers faced three main versions: loss in battle, ritual offering in the river, or part of an as-yet undiscovered burial. The only way to ascertain the truth was to conduct a comprehensive site investigation. The first stage of this large-scale investigation was a geophysical survey of the area around the find spot. Specially designed equipment, capable of measuring the slightest changes in the magnetic field underground, allowed for the creation of detailed maps of subsurface objects and, potentially, the discovery of a long-lost burial. The results were obtained surprisingly quickly, and specialists began to analyze them, noting the need to eliminate some strong magnetic anomalies for a more accurate interpretation of the data. Their observations showed that something, at first glance not too dramatic but potentially significant, had appeared in the archaeological landscape. We see a dark line there, running right through the interesting area, about a meter north of the find spot, one expert commented. That could be very interesting. Of course, it could have been just an old horseshoe or simply mineralized rock, but with bated breath, they understood that it could also be the long-lost sword blade. And although the overall results of the geophysical survey proved somewhat disappointing in terms of finding a large burial, a mysterious anomaly was discovered in the ground, very close to the location of the golden sword fragments. Could this be the very missing blade, waiting for its moment for centuries? Time was running out. It was time for the excavation to begin. So what happened at this mysterious site? First, a team of experienced excavators began work, removing the topsoil mechanically, exposing the ancient horizons. Then, they carefully cleaned the surface by hand so that researchers could see the upper part of the subsoil in all its unvarnished mystery. At this stage, according to all archaeological canons, they expected to see a clear grave outline, a dark stain indicating organic decomposition, or perhaps a ring ditch surrounding the burial site. But, unfortunately, nothing of the sort appeared. As layers of earth were removed one by one, the theory of a burial here became increasingly unlikely, leaving researchers facing a new enigma and once again prompting reflection on the fate of the ancient sword and its mysterious owner. However, there was another hypothesis explaining the sword's presence at this location. Perhaps it was placed in the river as a ritual offering to ancient deities, and then, during dredging operations, it was re-extracted onto the bank and buried under layers of spoil or gravel. At this time, attention focused on the metal detector's work. Had it already revealed anything? The first results looked very promising, inspiring a significant degree of optimism. The device registered 4 to 5 distinct signals, one of which stood out as particularly promising. It was presumed to be something dense, possibly even precious metal, gold or silver. Researchers crossed their fingers, hoping for luck. The only way to move forward was to reliably determine if the material found was indeed spoil extracted from the river. If the sword was discovered in this river spoil, it would certainly refute the burial theory, wouldn't it? Not entirely, was his somewhat despairing reply, because it's quite likely that a burial existed right here, but it was destroyed by the river's current, as riverbeds change over centuries. Moreover, it was important to remember that the excavation site was located on a parish boundary, an area where the discovery of ancient burials was highly anticipated. Kevin, among other things, served as an artifacts consultant for the portable antiquity scheme. On that day, he met with Keith Quellway, a metal detecting enthusiast who had come to report his recent discovery. That's right. It's a pyramidal sword pommel, Keith exclaimed. It turned out that the find dated to the Anglo-Saxon period, specifically the late 6th or early 7th century. By an amazing coincidence, this artifact was also a sword part, known as a pyramidal mount. However, this mount was made of silver, featured unusual carving and stone inlay, which made it an object of immense interest to specialists in Anglo-Saxon culture. Kevin proceeded to register the mount, after which all collected data was to be sent to the Portable Antiquities Scheme, whose central database was located in London, near the world-renowned British Museum. The narrator, seeking to understand the organization's principles more deeply, traveled to London to meet with the scheme's education officer and obtain comprehensive information about its activities. The question arose, how does the Portable Antiquities Scheme actually function? In essence, it is a voluntary system for registering archaeological finds. When private individuals discover any artifacts, whether with a metal detector, or if they are farmers during fieldwork, gardeners, or even just people walking their dogs, they have the opportunity to hand them over to a finds liaison officer. who is typically based in a local museum. This officer registers the object, informs the finders about its nature, and, most importantly, meticulously records all accompanying archaeological information, preventing its irreversible loss. All collected information is accumulated in a centralized electronic database. Indeed, anyone can search this database and view finds made in their own area. Thus, each registered object is carefully measured, its exact location is recorded, detailed photographs are taken, and all this information becomes available to researchers and the general public. In essence, the officer's task is to extract maximum data from each find to gain insight into the lives of people who inhabited this territory in the past, the events that occurred there, and the overall state of the archaeological heritage. Most of this information is subsequently published on the scheme's website. The exact geographical coordinates of the find spot are not disclosed on the website, as this may be archaeologically sensitive territory requiring protection. However, in all other aspects, users can obtain comprehensive information about the object's nature, its approximate location, and view its photographs. Since its establishment in 1997, the Portable Antiquities Scheme has registered an impressive 50,000 archaeological artifacts. On the map of the Lincolnshire region, many red dots symbolized already registered finds, but only 2 of them represented ancient weapons. The question arose, would the researchers be able to add another red dot to this map by the end of the current excavations? At the excavation site, archaeologists worked tirelessly, but so far, they had not managed to discover anything substantial. Time was rapidly running out, and a decision was made to deepen the trench in the investigated area to reach older layers. What did Kevin eventually manage to discover? Hi, please tell me about the different layers we see here. What's right on top? He asked. On top is the topsoil, which supports vegetation, especially the grass cover, Kevin explained. And this orange mass here is gravel, and it's identical to what we see at the very bottom of the trench. This indicates that it was extracted from a significantly greater depth. Consequently, the most obvious source of this material is the river, located directly beyond the boundary of the investigated area. It is likely that at a certain period, when riverbed clearing work was carried out, all this material was dredged up and used to create a protective embankment along the bank. The discovered traces served as direct proof of this activity. The base of the embankment was before them, evidenced by a distinct straight line. Since the sword fragments were found precisely in this gravel layer, it undeniably indicated that they were extracted from the river. If it were a burial, the artifact should have been in the lower, undisturbed layers of soil. However, the question of the anomaly recorded in the geophysical report remained unresolved. Jim continued to take measurements with the detector. Had he found the sword blade? The signal was still present, localized approximately in this spot, buried under relatively recent spoil extracted from the river. Right, these materials are sealed beneath the yellow layer, the bank, which definitely means they're earlier, the specialist confirmed. Thus, it was not ruled out that this could have been part of an ancient burial. What did Kevin ultimately discover? The narrator eagerly awaited the outcome, and he was not alone in his excitement. This circumstance holds colossal significance. It completely refutes any possibility that these sword fragments were found at a burial site. They were undoubtedly extracted from the river. Thus, the burial hypothesis is entirely excluded. Although the interrelationship between the parish boundary and the find location persists, in an area with a rich history of discoveries, various types of weapons discarded in the river. Researchers are increasingly leaning towards the idea that this was a votive offering. It seems this discovery definitively discards the burial theory in the search for this elusive blade. One of the volunteers, equipped with a metal detector, offered to meticulously survey the riverbed. Suddenly, a signal rang out. "Oh, wait. You've got a signal, Chris?" came the question. Yes, was the enthusiastic reply. "Fantastic. Is it true?" However, hope quickly faded. "It's going away. It's not very strong." "Yes, it's somewhere behind. It could be anything. Can't get it out." "Whatever it is, I'll try." Kevin offered his suggestion. Since it's small, it could just be a piece of iron mixed with concrete, and there's a lot of iron in the soil here. He could have gotten it. Unfortunately, it turned out to be far more mundane. Oh no, it's a piece of gravel. The riverbed had been deepened multiple times over the last few hundred years, and it was extremely unlikely that any archaeological objects could have survived. However, Angela had initially disagreed with the river origin theory. She expressed her doubt about the idea of a votive offering, explaining, "Anglo-Saxons valued their swords very highly. They gave them to people, and I just can't imagine them throwing a sword of that quality into a river." When asked if she thought it could have been a burial, Angela replied, "Well, that's certainly what I looked for first because, the damage to the sword hilt is so relatively fresh. But when you look at the ground where the sword hilt was found, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever for any burial scenario. So I'm just stumped. I really am stumped. I don't know. Maybe it's an accidental loss." The researchers wondered how people could lose their swords. Perhaps they were knocked out of their hands in battle or something similar occurred. "So, no more clues?" came the question. "No, it just becomes one of those exotic but wonderful and mysterious finds." Perplexed? Well, the entire research team seems to be in confusion. The excavations have not yielded definitive evidence either way. However, all possibilities have not yet been exhausted. These amazing artifacts could not have appeared out of nowhere, and to understand their history, one must look to the past. When the Roman legions left Britain in the early 5th century, pagan invaders poured in from the continent. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes fought fiercely to establish their kingdoms across the land. Some of their names still survive today: Northumbria, Wessex, and Mercia. The deeds of these kings are known from legends, sagas, and wills that have reached us across more than a millennium. At the British Museum, Leslie Webster examined these ancient texts, seeking to understand if she could help determine the origin of the found sword. And remarkably, from literary and historical sources, both poetic works and documentary records, it becomes evident how important, valuable, and highly revered swords were during this period. They are often characterized as ancient and enduring, as things passed down from generation to generation. Turning to wills, especially from the late Saxon period, one can find many mentions of richly adorned, exceedingly beautiful swords. For instance, in the will of Athelstan Etheling, son of King Athelred the Unready, he bequeathed 11 swords. Most interestingly, he left a sword that belonged to King Offa to his brother Edmund. Offa the Great was a ruler who reigned in the late 8th century. This will dates to 1014, so this sword was approximately 200 years old when it was bequeathed. So, swords were incredibly valuable treasures, considered extremely powerful, and even acquired names. Over time, legends formed around these beautiful weapons, such as the great Saxon epic poem Beowulf. It tells of a legendary king whose sword is a vanquisher of both men and monsters. In a fierce struggle with a terrifying creature, Grendel's mother, his own sword betrays him. It cannot pierce her hideous, tough hide, and then he notices a wondrous blade hanging on the wall, described as a creation of giants and an ancient relic. He seizes it from the wall and severs her head, and such is the heat of her blood that the sword's blade melts, leaving only the hilt. And, of course, in the case of the found artifact, the blade is also missing. Motifs of blood monsters or serpents characterize a significant portion of Saxon art and mythology, and their depictions can be seen on many outstanding treasures found at Sutton Hoo. If you look closely, on one of the exhibits, you can see 2 intertwined serpents. Susan Launese, a specialist in scientific analysis, studied the decoration of the found sword. What parallels could she and Angela see? The interlaced pattern on this artifact is astonishingly beautiful. What does it depict? The researcher wondered. It's an absolutely fantastic design, actually, of 4 animals. It's hard to distinguish, but if we slow down the playback, we can pick out different serpents. 1, 2, 3, possibly 4 mythical creatures, all intertwined. It's incredibly beautiful, very carefully balanced, and it's an absolutely magnificent design. The ornament on the pommel was essentially the same as on the hilt plates. Yes, it has the exact same design. You can see the same filigree wirework. You can see finer fragments of wire here, outlined by very thin wire. And do you see a slightly worn spot at the very top? There are many wire elements here, and this is probably where the owner held their hand on the hilt, and many pommels have almost identical signs of wear. It's almost as if men stood, of course, with their hand resting on the pommel, in a position of constant use. Anglo-Saxon swords of this type are extremely rare and incredibly complex to manufacture. Researchers asked a specialist blacksmith to demonstrate how it was done. The starting point for the study was an X-ray of a Saxon sword discovered several years ago. Careful analysis of this image reveals the true reason why such blades are called pattern-welded swords. The special chevrons visible in the image clearly demonstrate that the weapon was skillfully forged from multiple layers of iron, combined into a single, strong blade. Initially, creating such a weapon required about 6 kilograms of raw metal, but in the end, the finished blade weighed only 1.5 kilograms. Such a process, taking a full week of intense, exhausting labor, required significant resources. Consequently, only representatives of the highest echelons of society could afford to commission such a laborious and expensive item. The final stage in creating this masterpiece was revealing the unique pattern on its surface. Upon returning to the British Museum, the narrator met with Angela and Heinrich Hark, a recognized specialist in ancient swords. They emphasized the exceptional rarity of such artifacts. In Anglo-Saxon England from the 5th to the 7th centuries, swords in general were considered a great rarity. It is estimated that only 1 in 20 adult men might have been buried with a sword, and this applied to any sword at all. However, when it comes to a blade like the one being examined, with its unique pattern and high level of finish, its possession indicates a completely different social status. In this case, perhaps only 1 in 200 men, or even fewer, could boast of owning such an exquisite and expensive weapon. Heinrich explained that the hilt of the examined sword belonged to an extremely rare category known as the Beckenvalsgard type. He also suggested that the researchers' next destination should be Sweden. Such a proposal raised a number of questions for the narrator. Already? What does that mean? What's going on? Perplexity turned into acceptance. Okay, but where exactly are we going? His wife, it was noted, regarded this sudden trip with some suspicion. To the question of whether it was just a meeting in London, the answer came. Yes, I'll take you to Heathrow. Only after that would all the details be revealed. The journey led the narrator and Kevin to the National Historical Museum in Stockholm, where they were met by curator Kent Anderson. He showed them an impressive collection of armor and weapons. Kent Anderson noted, "We have several such swords in our collection. Most of them belong to the Viking Age, but this one is earlier. It's contemporary with the one you showed me." With interest, he offered one for examination. "Look at this one. You see, its blade is made of pattern-welded steel, with a distinct zigzag pattern in the center, and on both sides, there are steel cutting edges. This is precisely the type of blade that the examined hilt would have had, if its blade had survived to this day." When asked about the location of another sword, the answer was that it was on display. Upon seeing it, the narrator exclaimed, "My God, that's amazing. It's like a temple filled with magnificent objects, true treasures." The details particularly caught their attention, and there it is. It's these details. Oh, they're incredible! This is absolutely breathtaking work. The sword bore a strong resemblance to a find from Lincolnshire, yet its ornamentation was significantly bolder. It wasn't characterized by delicate lines, but rather by deep carvings, serving as an undeniable symbol of power and might. The question arose, who could have owned such a valuable item? The answer was obvious, a king, of course. Such impeccable craftsmanship indicated that such a weapon could only have belonged to a monarch. Researchers pondered why such similar design elements were found on both the Swedish artifact and the Lincolnshire sword. It was hypothesized that contacts between the regions were extraordinarily direct. One must also consider that society at the time was highly mobile. People actively moved across Europe. The practice of gift-giving held immense significance during that period, and a sword with gold fittings could have served as an ideal diplomatic offering from one ruler to another. A hypothesis emerged. Is it possible that the owner of the Swedish sword was acquainted with the possessor of the Lincolnshire blade? They undoubtedly could have known about each other, as preserving the memory of great individuals was a crucial aspect of the culture. It was for this very purpose that epics like Beowulf were created, to immortalize someone's memory. Thus, this sword belonged to a prominent figure in Sweden, and a nobleman in Lincolnshire, in turn, could have been aware of such individuals from heroic sagas. These legends recounted tales of famous kings or outstanding warriors for hundreds of years. So, was this expedition worth Kevin's efforts? Absolutely. The opportunity to see and even touch these artifacts firsthand allowed for a profound realization of the depth and closeness of historical connections. Even to an untrained eye, the hilts of the Swedish sword strikingly resembled the hilt of the blade under investigation. This clearly demonstrated the existence of connections at the highest echelons of society. Items like this sword were not commodities for sale, they were not involved in trade transactions. Instead, they were exchanged as valuable diplomatic gifts. Therefore, a highly influential figure in Sweden sent this truly significant object to another equally important person in Lincolnshire. The researchers' journey, which began in rural Lincolnshire, not only led them to Sweden but also allowed them to take a true leap through time, into an era when brave and loyal warriors fought to the death for their lord. And though the name of the king to whom this sword belonged will forever remain unknown, this outstanding symbol of his power and wealth is now available for future generations to behold.